Hey guys, Mana here, bringing you another Warlock guide. This time I'm going to be talking about everything you need to know to be a successful Demonology Warlock. Now, when talking about specs, these are the most recommended ones, I would say. There are optional talents that you can go for, like Aura Foreboding. You can take points out of Demonic Embrace, for instance. I mean, really, it's just figuring out whatever your raid needs, whatever utility you might need at the moment, and what you're most comfortable with, like I've said before. Now, for your prime glyphs, you're going to be using Metamorphosis, Immolate, and Lash of Pain. Now, I know what you're thinking, but give me a second, I'll get to that in a minute. For your major glyphs, you're going to be using Shadow Bolt and Life Tap, and you can either use Soul Link for raids, or if you're in a 5-man and you need CC, you can also use Glyph of Fear instead. Now, I know a lot of people might be confused right now because I'm recommending the Lash of Pain glyph to Demonology, because traditionally Demonology always uses the Felguard, but that's not the case right now. Demonology uses the Succubus for any single target fight, and it's going to be using the Felguard for AoE fights. Now for your stat priorities, I've said this before a lot of times actually, but it's very important that everybody understands this. Intellect is better than hit. You're still going to want to get hit cap, but you're really not going to want to ever sacrifice intellect in order to get to the hit cap. After hit, your next best stat is going to be haste, then mastery, and then crit. And this is at the lower gear levels. Once you get to the higher gear levels, you're going to want int, hit to cap, then you're going to want mastery, then haste, and then crit. Now for gems, nothing's changed from Affliction to Demonology. You're still going to want a Burning Shadow Spirit Diamond as your meta, and if it's expensive, you can still go with a Chaotic Shadow Spirit Diamond instead. For your red, you're going to want a Brilliant Inferno Ruby. For your yellow, you're going to want a Reckless Ember Topaz. And for your blue, you're going to want a Veiled Demon's Eye. And as I've said before, if the socket bonus isn't very good, you're going to want to ignore the socket bonus and just put a Brilliant Inferno Ruby on it instead. Now, for enchants, I've included links in the description box below to Wowhead. Each link will obviously take you to each recommended enchant. Some of them are pretty expensive, so I've included a link to a cheaper alternative that can work almost as well. For reforging, you're going to want to increase your hit rating. So you're going to be taking your mastery and your crit, you're going to be reforging that to hit. And if you're already hit capped, then you can take your master and your crit and you can reforge that to haste instead. For professions, you're still going to want 2 professions that'll increase your intellect as much as possible. Tailoring is still the best one, but really any profession that'll increase your intellect is pretty much good enough anyway. So for your spell priority, you're going to want to use Metamorphosis and Demon Soul whenever they're off cooldown. You're going to want to refresh your Immolate close to when it's about to run out. You're going to want to use Hand of Gul'dan whenever it's off cooldown. You're going to want to use Bane of Doom as soon as it falls off the target. You're going to want to refresh your Corruption when it's close to running out. You're going to want to use Incinerate whenever Molten Core procs. And you're going to want to use Soulfire whenever you're in Decimation. And if none of these things need to be done, you can also be using Shadow Bolts as your filler spell. And if you're ever in melee range, and it's safe to be in melee range, you should be using Shadow Flame and Immolation Aura. So during movement, there's a few things you can do. First of all, if your Bane of Doom runs out, then you should be recasting it as soon as possible. You should be refreshing your Corruption if it's about to run out. If these things don't need to get done, then you should be life tapping. But if you don't think you're going to need mana, then you should be using Fel Flame instead. For very, very large AoE situations where you're not really afraid of pulling aggro, you should be using your Felguard's Fellstorm. You should be using Shadow Flame. You should be using Immolation Aura while you're in Metamorphosis. You should be summoning your Infernal. And you should be channeling your Hellfire. And all these will do an insane amount of AoE damage. So for add-ons, last time I talked about an internal cooldown monitor like Need to Know, and some kind of timer add-on for your dots, such as Quartz. And those two are useful for Demonology. But something else that's useful for Demonology is some kind of a cooldown monitor. Now, I use OmniCC, And this is very useful because Demonology really does rely on you using your Demon Soul and you using your Metamorphosis as soon as they're off cooldown. And this is very good for that. And that about does it for the Demonology guide. For next week, I'm going to have the Destruction guide up. And for Tuesday, I'm going to have my first episode of More Dots, which you guys might have heard about from my channel. Basically, I'm going to be answering your general Warlock questions. So if you have any Warlock questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I'll see if I can have them on the first episode. As always, if you enjoyed what you saw, feel free to like and subscribe. Later, guys.